live extreme weather briefing with a lot to talk about. We're watching closely the Western Caribbean for development of a tropical system. And again, good morning everybody. This is a live extreme weather briefing with a lot to talk about. We're monitoring the tropics for development in the Western Caribbean, which is a prime zone for October hurricane development. In fact, Superstorm Sandy developed in that exact same location. Hurricane Matthew actually came from further east in the Caribbean, then passed over the western tip of Haiti, then approached the east coast of Florida with some dramatic storm surge as well and some wind. The bottom right that you can see is the wind from the Daytona Beach area from Hurricane Matthew. The footage in the upper left is actually the snow portion of Superstorm Sandy. I was a little bit late getting in there, and Superstorm Sandy actually was a slingshot in as a negatively tilted upper level trough was approaching from the west, and that caused a tropical cyclone that was Superstorm Sandy to curve back to the west, accelerate, and then slam into coastal New Jersey with a double-digit storm surge. Absolutely destructive storm surge there, especially along the coast of New Jersey. But I was supposed to do a Dominator event at the SEMA convention in Las Vegas, and thankfully I was able to contact our sponsors then. It ended up resulting in me losing my sponsorship with LineX, but I just had to chase Superstorm Sandy. So I pointed the ship off to the east, drove all the way across the country with Connor McCrory, and we actually arrived in West Virginia. Here is Elkins to cover the blizzard portion on the backside of Superstorm Sandy. A very wet snowfall that happened. A couple feet of snow fell over portions of West Virginia. Led to a lot of power outages. Additionally, as that wind interacted with the very heavy snow accumulation on those power lines and trees, and also the major storm surge along coastal New Jersey, and that's from that slingshot method. You had a very intense tropical cyclone, a Hurricane Sandy that was offshore. Then you had a negatively tilted trough that was gaining strength approaching from the west. Definitely the hurricane in the warm sector contributed to the development of a very negatively tilted trough and expansion of the ridge just off to the east, and that caused Superstorm Sandy to curve off to the northwest, eventually to the west, and accelerated on the northern side of that upper trough as it phased with the trough, and then slammed New Jersey with that double-digit storm surge. But as I mentioned, we covered the snow portion of that storm. The footage from Elkins, West Virginia, is the snow portion of Superstorm Sandy, as it was a tropical system phasing with the mid-latitude cyclone, or an upper-level trough that was gaining a negative tilt. So you had that cold air coming into the backside that interacted with the immense precip shield from Superstorm Sandy, and then that resulted in this big-time snow, winter weather alerts as well. And again, in the bottom right, that's the wind portion of Hurricane Matthew that came in dramatically. They're approaching east coast of Florida. And the reason I mentioned those two systems is that they're both October hurricanes that impacted the U.S. And oftentimes those hurricanes this time of year will develop down in the Western Caribbean. We've got a non-tropical upper-level low to the southeast of Bermuda that might develop into a tropical system. But this one's going to be a non-factor for the U.S. It's going to meander out there. At best, it'll become a fish storm. May not even develop into a tropical system anyway. The open Atlantic like this usually gets pretty harsh with a lot of wind shear during the late season in October, and that's why we're really watching the Western Caribbean for development of this late season hurricane. Hurricane Michael in 2018 also developed in the Western Caribbean before moving off to the north. Hurricane Charlie was an earlier season one, but it developed off in the Western Caribbean, passing over Cuba, eventually impacting the west coast of Florida. And even more famously was Hurricane Wilma, that formed down in this region, becoming one of the most rapidly intensifying hurricanes ever in the Atlantic Basin. And actually, Hurricane Delta was the only one that intensified more rapidly from a tropical depression to a Category 4 hurricane. But Hurricane Wilma bottomed out into a Category 5 with a 2 nautical mile wide eye. And then Hurricane Wilma ended up stalling out over the northeastern Yucatan, over Cozumel and Cancun. Actually, the whole entire day they were inside the eye of that then Category 4 hurricane. And then a trough approached from the west, as often happens during the late season during October, and that caused Wilma to turn off to the northeast and then impacted the west coast of Florida, which is a pretty rare landfall in that area. Definitely was pretty exposed to an intense hurricane landfall and a ton of damage there on the west coast of Florida, passing all the way through Fort Lauderdale area, Definitely had some damage there as well as that passed over the Florida Peninsula. But I'm going to map out some of these tracks of the more famous October hurricanes, starting off with the Superstorm Sandy. And Superstorm Sandy actually developed into a very potent hurricane, but developed off in the eastern side of this target area that we're watching for development of a tropical cyclone in the next 5 to 7 days. Sandy then lifted north over the eastern tip of Cuba. It did pass as well just on the east side of Jamaica, passing over the eastern tip of Cuba. And then it was threatening Florida even. It definitely moved over the eastern Bahamas. Sandy did as a potent hurricane. The east coast of Florida was watching this closely. Then it appeared as though it might even become a fish storm, meandering out in between Bermuda and the coastline of Florida. But then that upper trough started approaching from the west. It was a big upper trough, had a negative tilt. That means that the trough axis is tilting in this direction from the northwest to the southeast, and that caused the steering currents to actually pull Sandy back to the coast, approaching the New Jersey coast, accelerating as well, and that caused a slingshot effect and actually catapulted that entire storm surge into the eastern coast of New Jersey. This was 2012. Late season came in about October 27, just before Halloween there in the coastline of New Jersey, and brought a lot of snow on the backside of that precipitation shield as that upper trough and the cold air was coming in, the Arctic air. The warm sector of this tropical cyclone was energized by the arrival of this hurricane, and this was an upper level pattern like I've never seen happen in my lifetime, where the trough phased perfectly with this hurricane strengthening, dominating over the Gulf Stream, and then with a negative tilt, it caused a squeeze play to happen between that negatively tilted trough and the intensifying ridge off to the east, and catapulted Superstorm Sandy into the New Jersey coastline with a double-digit storm surge. But really the important part is that Sandy developed down in that prime zone in the Western Caribbean that we're watching right now, and that we were watching earlier with Hurricane Delta. That also initiated off in the Western Caribbean, but that was from a tropical wave that approached that zone from the east. This system appears to originate from a cluster of convection that'll develop over northern South America, northern Venezuela there as well, northern Colombia, and then it'll drift over these warm waters of the Western Caribbean, and it looks like at least one tropical cyclone could come out of that, and most of the models are showing it drifting off to the north, potentially moving into the eastern Gulf of Mexico. Most members, though, take it over the Florida Keys, out over the Bahamas, and then lifting north from the Gulf Stream, very similar to a Superstorm Sandy track. And then a big trough approaches from the west, an upper level trough, and that actually could even pull the system off to the northwest. It could develop another surface low out here, feeding off that temperature gradient that's enhanced by a hurricane in the warm sector and an approaching upper trough. So there is a chance, as we get toward the end of October, to have some type of a superstorm hybrid form here off the northeastern coast. Some of the models are even showing a swath of some heavier snow on the western side of that precipitation shield. That tropical moisture and the cold air coming in from Canada could definitely result in a big problem out there around October 26, 27, 28 time frame. But we're watching that incredibly closely. And you may remember Hurricane Michael. That one formed up here in the Western Caribbean, a little bit closer to the Yucatan. The initial models were showing it moving in and passing between Cuba and the Yucatan, and then it passed into the eastern Gulf of Mexico and then bottomed out into a Category 5 landfall that came in at Mexico Beach there in western Florida. The Gulf of Mexico temperatures were incredibly warm with the loop current over here in the eastern Gulf of Mexico maintaining warmer temperatures. The Western Gulf, Northern and Western Gulf, is definitely worked over by all the hurricanes so far this year, so there is quite a bit of cold water that hopefully will help to protect the Northwestern Gulf for the rest of the season. The loop current in the Eastern Gulf of Mexico maintains relatively warm waters compared to the Northwestern Gulf, and there is a chance that if Epsilon moves into the Eastern Gulf of Mexico, it could at least maintain intensity or be an impact across the western coast of Florida there. More than likely, though, Epsilon will pass over Cuba, weaken a bit, maybe even miss Florida off to the south, slam the Bahamas, then move to the north and become some type of a superstorm hybrid across the northeast in late October. But there's a lot of different scenarios still, 10 to 14 days ahead of this. The GFS actually has multiple tropical cyclones coming out of this gyre that is forecast to form across the western Caribbean But that was Hurricane Michael. You may also remember Hurricane Opal back in 1995. I know I remember it. I was a teenager living in Michigan, science Olympian, collecting insects at the time, watching the Weather Channel nonstop. And I remember Opal coverage. That was another one that kind of meandered down here in the western tip of the Yucatan, as we've seen even happen multiple times this year. And then an upper trough came, and then that was able to slingshot Opal all the way up to the north. Opal was definitely a stout, damaging late season hurricane there. We also had Hurricane Mitch. That was a very powerful hurricane that came in to Honduras. But Hurricane Mitch actually developed just to the southwest of Jamaica, passing to the north of this development zone, and actually turned to the left into Honduras, and then meandered over Central America, causing catastrophic flooding, mudslides, as well over a large portion of Central America and southern Mexico, and then emerged and then did that classic track, getting picked up by a low latitude trough and then lifting off to the northeast across South Florida. So that track is definitely something that's common, where you get these developing in the Western Caribbean. A trough approaches with a jet stream further south during the late season, October into November, and that causes the system to turn to the northeast. But definitely Florida, the west coast of Florida, you got to keep an eye out for these late season hurricanes. You also have to watch out for those upper level troughs phasing with the hurricane and becoming a superstorm type situation like Sandy in the northeast. All of those scenarios are on the table as we're watching the Western Caribbean here for development. And now I'm going to show you the Hurricane Matthew storm surge here next. This was the Hurricane Matthew storm surge from the Daytona Beach area up even further northeast of there as well. A big time storm surge as that Category 2 hurricane was skirting the coast of eastern Florida, and then ended up stalling out over the Carolinas as well, becoming a prolific rainmaker up there. Catastrophic rain across eastern North Carolina, as well as storm surge. Here's some of that surge near Daytona Beach and the Barrier Island, definitely showing the piling up of the water here, debris getting deposited as well. And this Hurricane Matthew actually passed over the western tip of Haiti before lifting off to the north, and it looked like it was going to make landfall across southeastern Florida, but ended up recurving a bit further north, and actually was a shore parallel movement to that hurricane, and that caused a wide-reaching storm surge from east central Florida all the way through the coastal Georgia, up through coastal Carolina, and then became a major rainmaker event. Big time flooding as well in eastern North Carolina, but this is the storm surge aspect of that, with that onshore flow just lifting to the north across east central, northeastern Florida, causing quite a bit of storm surge. And this is the GFS ensemble. So these are the different GFS members here. This is from the incredible tropicaltidbits.com site. And this is why the National Hurricane Center has this area outlined to the southwest of Jamaica. Climatologically, this is also an area to watch for late season hurricane development and tropical cyclones. Oftentimes they lift to the north, impacting the Cuba area. So some of the ensemble members are showing this moving into the eastern Gulf of Mexico and even retreating back through the Florida Straits between Cuba and the Keys, then impacting portions of the Bahamas, and then lifting northeast along that Gulf Stream and potentially phasing with an upper level storm system later on. So we're going to keep a close eye on that. But some of these members are showing rapid intensification of a tropical cyclone there to the southwest of Jamaica. That's not surprising because water temperatures are incredibly warm out here in the Western Caribbean, and this area of low pressure here could actually generate a couple of different tropical cyclones, and I'm going to show you the evolution here really quick, and then I'm going to show you the winter weather alerts that are also in place right now across portions of the northern Rockies, even North Dakota definitely has that. So this is the moving forward with time. This again is the tropicaltidbits.com website, the ensemble mean sea level pressure centers. These are the different members of the GFS run. And now I'm going to step forward with time. This is on October 22nd, so this is the middle of next week. We're very likely will have a tropical cyclone here in the Western Caribbean. We're also going to be watching for the development of a trough across the central U.S. that eventually will lift this system off to the northeast. But notice how it's moving off to the north towards central Cuba. Most of the members, and in fact, most of them are a pretty strong tropical cyclone, with those pressures dropping even into 970 millibars. A couple of those members are showing a pretty intense tropical cyclone lifting off to the north and impacting Cuba around October 23rd, 24th, 25th time frame. But definitely still some discrepancy amongst where these centers are going to be located and how quickly they'll lift off to the northeast. The timing of the approaching upper trough over the central U.S. is definitely going to play a factor. Some of the models show a delayed arrival of this upper trough, and actually this tropical cyclone, which is likely going to be Hurricane Epsilon, lifting north into the eastern Gulf of Mexico and then turning off to the northeast, impacting the western coast of Florida. Some of the members, though, have an earlier arrival of that upper trough and actually lift an Epsilon through the Bahamas, missing the Florida peninsula, but then lifting off to the northeast along the Gulf Stream, whereas most of the members show a pretty slow-moving tropical cyclone lifting north across western Cuba and into the eastern Gulf of Mexico, maybe even close to the Keys. A couple of the GFS models show a major hurricane here over the southeastern Gulf of Mexico, over the slightly warmer waters of the Gulf of Mexico loop current there in the eastern Gulf. And then you can see divergence as we're going out with time, closer to October 27th time frame. Some of the GFS lift a strong tropical cyclone northeastward just off the coast of North Carolina. Other members, though, have a stronger system here over the southeastern Gulf of Mexico. But really the differences are relative to timing and the ejection of those tropical cyclones off to the northeast. And that it depends on the arrival of that central U.S. trough as well. We're going to watch that closely. This is the present pattern with a very cold system, a lot of flow out of the northwest. You can see this ridge building over the northeastern Pacific. There's a lot of warm water out here over the northeastern Pacific, despite the negative anomalies in the tropical Pacific with La Nina. Over top of that, over portions of the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, at least the northern branch of that PDO horseshoe, there's a lot of warm water out here over the northeast, and I think that's going to lead to the formation or the tendency for a ridge to form there in the northeastern Pacific, and that would open the door for cold air intrusions on the east side of the northern Rockies from Canada, from Alberta. A lot of cold air could be pouring in here across the northern Rockies, even into Colorado. You could get disturbances within this northwesterly flow that could lead to a pretty snowy winter here across at least the Colorado Rockies up into the Rockies of western Montana. Maybe the Canadian Rockies could also have a decent snow season. Could be a little bit warm there, though, across coastal British Columbia, but I do think that this type of a pattern with the ridge located a little further west with very warm water over the northeastern Pacific, even though there's not as much coupling between the atmosphere and the ocean in the extratropical Pacific, still should lead to a tendency for this ridge to be a bit further west instead of further east, dominating the western U.S., as often is the case with La Nina events. But definitely if you're using just La Nina to forecast your winter outlook, there's a lot of discrepancies between the La Nina analog years and winter temperature. The last big time La Nina we had was 2011, and that bled into the spring and definitely contributed to a very consolidated upper level jet stream over the U.S. and a big time trough that eventually led to the super outbreak that was April 25th to 27th, 2011. But this is the current pattern, and this pattern is going to flatten out over time. This is right now. This is the 6Z GFS that I'm looking at. The 12Z is not quite out yet. Here you can see this upper level low that was just to the southeast of Bermuda that does have some potential of developing into a tropical cyclone. However, there's a lot of shear over here. It's a hostile environment for tropical cyclones over the open tropical Atlantic. Here you can see a bit of a Bermuda high that tries to develop over the Gulf of Mexico over toward Florida. That could allow for eventually for an Epsilon to lift off to the north into the eastern Gulf of Mexico before that trough develops across the western U.S. This is around October 20. You can still see the tendency for that ridge. And there we go. Sorry, my slide there was just stuck on the tropics. So here is the upper level pattern for the GFS, and I'll run through this once again. This is the tropical tidbits loop of the mean sea level pressure oscillations here, or these are the different members of the GFS, showing a pretty potent tropical cyclone here in the Western Caribbean to the south of Cuba. This is around October 24th, toward the end of next week, but by the middle of next week, or even the early portion, we'll likely see a tropical cyclone, maybe a Hurricane Epsilon here in this very prime zone in the Western Caribbean. Some of these different members actually have a major hurricane out here to the west of Jamaica, to the south of Cuba, and taking a very traditional track for late season hurricanes. There definitely is a difference in timing, and that depends on the arrival of this upper trough in the central U.S. Some of the GFS members eject that tropical cyclone more rapidly across the Bahamas and then lifting north through the Gulf Stream, and then the upper level trough approaches, potentially phasing with that system, and it could develop into a superstorm type scenario. Other members, though, show a later arrival of that upper trough, a slower moving hurricane passing over western Cuba, maybe even arriving into the southeastern Gulf of Mexico. Some of those members even have a major hurricane in the southeastern Gulf of Mexico before putting on the brakes and turning back to the southeast through the Florida Strait between Florida and Cuba, and then lifting off to the northeast. But still a lot of discrepancies relative to the timing. The European model doesn't even develop a hurricane down there in the Western Caribbean, but this is it. These are the different members of the GFS ensemble. A lot of them have a pretty intense hurricane in the eastern Gulf of Mexico, and so I wouldn't be surprised if we have another impact by a hurricane across the western coast of Florida, maybe the Florida Keys, and then this hurricane lifting off to the northeast, phasing with the upper trough moving through the eastern U.S., and who knows, maybe even a Superstorm Sandy situation could happen where that trough becomes negatively tilted. Positive feedbacks result. The hurricane energizes the warm sector, leads to more rapid height rises off to the east of that trough, and that will lead to more of a negative tilt upper trough interacting with a hurricane slingshotting in toward the coast, but it's just way too far out to tell what's going to happen. It's even possible that this tropical cyclone could lift north through central Cuba, hit the Bahamas, and then completely miss the United States. But Mark is actually testing the surgeonator today in a lake in Alberta, so he's using that to measure the depth of the water out there. Pretty dangerous mission with a strong cold front arriving there near the Calgary area, just to the south of there. But he's going to be testing the surgeonator, the electronic version, which will be capable of actually broadcasting that data live as well. So we're going to be able to see the storm surge as it's coming in real time, and that'll be ready if this late season hurricane materializes and impacts portions of the southeast. So this is what I was showing earlier when I was stuck on that tropical map. This shows a pattern right now with this ridge building in the northeastern Pacific. That's coincident with a lot of warm water across the extratropical branch of the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. Despite cold water in the tropical Pacific, or at least anomalously cold water that's associated with La Nina, and really the extratropical Pacific, subtropical and extratropical Pacific, the anomalies out there, in my opinion, definitely have more of an impact on the North American climate than the negative anomalies in the tropical Pacific. And really this pattern with these warm anomalies over the northeastern Pacific should encourage that ridge axis to be a bit further west instead of dominating the western U.S. as we often see with that ridge trough pattern. I do think that this ridge axis will be a bit further to the west, and that should lead to the likelihood of cold air intrusions to the east of the northern Rockies here, and that could lead to a cold and snowy winter across the northern Rockies, and that could even impact portions of the Colorado Rockies. Usually the best ski seasons out here, at least in the I-70 corridor mountains, northern Colorado Rockies, the Wyoming Rockies, and western Montana, are these west-northwesterly flow events where you get disturbances embedded within the west-northwesterly flow, as opposed to a deep trough that'll develop across the west. That will most often impact the southern Rockies, the Rockies there, mountains of Arizona and New Mexico. That's more of a El Nino pattern, more of a buckled pattern where you get the subtropical jet interacting with these troughs, leading to a deepening of the troughs and a slower moving, buckled upper level pattern. La Ninas are usually more progressive patterns, and so there is a chance that with the west-northwesterly flow, with disturbances embedded within, with this warm water over the northeastern Pacific, causing this ridge axis to be further west, that we could have a decent snow season here in the Colorado Rockies, and especially the northern Rockies, Montana, Wyoming up there, could definitely see some disturbances embedded within this west-northwesterly flow. But let's see what's going to happen now on the long range with the potential for a hurricane coming out of the Western Caribbean, and the potential for that hurricane to phase with a big-time trough. And that's usually what happens during the late season, because the jet stream is further south across North America. Here is the GFS showing that hurricane in the Western Caribbean around October 24th, later part of next week. I wish we could get to central Cuba, because we definitely want to intercept this hurricane when it's a more intense, purely tropical storm. Here you can see a bit of some zonal flow dominating across North America, a cutoff flow here moving into California. That could provide a little bit of relief for those wildfires. But that's also going to be a culprit for deepening an upper trough across the central U.S. right here. Notice how this ridge likes to build over the northeastern Pacific, and that's probably an intermodulation between the warm sea surface temperatures across the northeastern Pacific and the overlying atmosphere. That leads to a cutoff flow here that gets left behind by California. But this is the deepening trough excuse me, across the central U.S. on the 25th. That could end up phasing with Epsilon that's lifting north through the western Bahamas. The operational GFS actually has this hurricane lifting at least to 6Z. Some of those models have it meandering into the eastern Gulf of Mexico. Others, though, keep it further east with this developing trough. And it all depends on the timing of when this trough arrives and that squeeze play that will encourage a turn off to the northeast between this large anticyclone that's going to be dominating the open Pacific and this trough. We're getting a buckling of the upper level pattern right at the wrong time, just when a tropical system is going to be energizing this warm sector. That could lead to this trough increasing in amplitude across the eastern U.S. and even developing a negative tilt. This is 10 days out, so over 10 days now. So we're talking about fantasy land. But this GFS actually lifts a dangerous cyclone up toward Nova Scotia. You've got a big-time deepening upper-level trough here extending all the way down into the northern Gulf of Mexico. So this is definitely going to mark the end of this record-breaking Atlantic hurricane season. We've had the landfall of 10 named storms across the United States. That includes tropical storms, and that's a record. We've had 5 hurricanes that have made landfall this 2020 season. That's about one shy of the record of 6 hurricanes that have made landfall. I believe 2005 had 6 hurricanes. Even 2004 may have had 6 hurricane landfalls. But this could be a superstorm type situation, depending on if this upper level system can phase with that tropical cyclone that's lifting off to the north. Get my noggin out of there so that you can see it properly. And you definitely don't want to get fixated on the exact tracks or anything here, but this 6Z run of the GFS just rockets an Epsilon through the Bahamas, up north, all the way up into the Canadian Maritimes as this system is amplifying. If this trough arrives a bit earlier and goes negatively tilted, and then you get kind of a high that wraps in over the northeastern side as those positive feedbacks are getting enhanced with the Arctic air pouring south out of Canada. The warm sector energized by a tropical cyclone. There is a chance that it could pivot this system back to the northwest. You could get a record-breaking snowstorm on the cold side of this, energized by that tropical moisture. Looks like there could be some type of a pattern shift imminent way out in the long range too, with the big trough diving into the North Pacific. This would definitely be a much welcome pattern shift for the fire-ravaged areas here of California, the Pacific Northwest, even Colorado, with the Cameron Peak fire now over 150,000 acres, becoming the largest wildfire in state history in Colorado. That smoke plume definitely energized a couple days ago with that cold frontal passage and the increase in those winds, fanning those flames. But here you can see toward the 27th, 28th, this negatively tilted upper trough that basically absorbs the hurricane, but definitely all the tropical moisture in there, definitely enhancing that warm sector, leading to height rises and possibly a negatively tilted ridge as well. feeding into that. So this is a pattern that we need to watch very closely here. The GFS shows this very well, but the new GFS has done a very good job so far this season. The European has not done as good of a job, including with those hurricanes, where the GFS has done a very good job with this tropical season, in my opinion. Look at that. Nova Scotia with this pattern is just going to get hammered. And then this system's going to pass through and probably have snow on the backside of it to close out October. Look at that negatively tilted trough lifting into the northern Atlantic there. This is that pattern shift I was talking about. And this is way out near Fantasyland, so there's a good chance this isn't going to happen. This will probably lead to a dissipation of those very warm anomalies over the northeastern Pacific, sea surface temperature anomalies. If this happens, cutoff low over the southern U.S. But really, what will determine exactly where this hurricane comes in is the speed of this upper trough that we were talking about. That's about 10 days out. The speed and evolution of this upper trough. This is the trough that will be of interest. A later arrival of this trough could allow Epsilon to move into the southeastern Gulf of Mexico and then impact the southwestern coast of Florida before crossing it, lifting north on the Gulf Stream, and then becoming a superstorm. An earlier arrival of this system should cause Epsilon to pass over central Cuba, portions of the Bahamas, and then stay offshore before potentially curving back in as a hybrid system in the northeast of the Canadian Maritimes. But all of it depends on the speed and shape of this trough over the central U.S. that leaves this cutoff flow behind over our coastal California. Hopefully that will lead to some moisture across California and some mitigation of that wildfire threat. But this trough and how it transitions to negative and then or neutral tilt and then negative, and how it phases with this hurricane is going to be something that meteorologists are talking about nonstop on Twitter. Look at how low this vortex digs to the south, all the way down to the Gulf Coast by 26th, 27th. Will definitely, and if this is a slower hurricane lifting off to the north, it's going to lead to more height rises downstream of this trough. The warm conveyor belt will start, an energized warm sector, and there's a chance that if this develops a negative tilt earlier relative to when this hurricane lifts north, that it could pull it back in toward the mid-Atlantic region, and that's what we saw happen with a Superstorm Sandy. This also could lead to Dixie Alley severe weather toward 26th, 27th time period. So we'll also keep an eye on this for the threat of tornadoes as this trough transitions from positive to neutral to more of a negative tilt, the timing of which will definitely determine if there is severe weather, the timing relative to the diurnal cycle. But definitely a lot to watch about with this system. A lot to talk about as well. This is going to be fascinating. Basically showing the tropics transitioning to an extratropical system, a purely tropical system in a barotropic environment, one that is not dominated by temperature gradients, but the jet stream in the mid-latitudes is fueled by those temperature gradients below it. And so anytime you get a tropical system lifting northward into the extratropics and phasing with an upper-level storm system that is characterized by temperature gradients, it leads to a fascinating evolution meteorologically. Again, talking about that cold air coming in from the northwest could be a pattern that we see quite a bit during this winter. This is the Radar Omega app that actually shows these winter weather alerts. This is a winter weather advisory in the mountains of western Montana, showing up to 6 inches possibly in the mountains with 2 inches in the valleys. And this winter weather alert begins 3 a.m. tonight and continues through Saturday night. Definitely in those passes, those mountain roads could easily get slippery up there in western Montana. And you've also got a winter weather advisory continuing here in north central western North Dakota. 3 to 5 inches of snow possible. And this continues from, this starts at 9 p.m. this evening through tomorrow afternoon. And basically the heating of the day causing that snow to either change over to rain or those slippery conditions to definitely melt. But this will be fun to watch. There's also snowfall here on the Radar Omega app. Definitely a lot of cool new products. You can customize these weather alerts as well. Those are the winter weather alerts. But you can definitely see that snowfall here over the mountains of Idaho, western Montana as well. Looks like this area near the ski resorts could also get impacted. I think that Yellowstone could definitely see snowfall as well. Extending all the way down through the higher terrain around Bozeman could definitely get some higher amounts, up to 6 inches expected there. So winter is coming, and I think this is going to be a pattern that we're going to see quite a bit this winter, with that ridge axis building over the northeastern Pacific, opening the floodgates for cold Canadian air to come down just to the east side of the Canadian Rockies, and definitely could get some disturbances riding that northwesterly flow. So I think it could be a pretty snowy winter across portions of Colorado as well. I definitely would want those other alerts to be up. These are the winter alerts. Turn tornado warnings on, of course. So here it shows the model forecast snowfall. I guess the National Digital Forecast Database. Definitely showing even an excess of 6 inches of snow here across western Browning County. These are definitely showing the higher terrain, the mountains here of western Montana. A little bit less further south as you get closer to Yellowstone. It definitely looks like purely a higher terrain snow event. And it'll be interesting to see if that snowfall verifies across northwestern North Dakota into southern Saskatchewan. Looks like winter is definitely going to arrive there as well. This is the 6-hour snowfall. So the snow is actually going to arrive later on this afternoon and evening across western Montana. It's already arriving in the Calgary area. Mark is out here testing the surgeonator sensor by boat. So he was definitely concerned about the deteriorating conditions out there in Calgary with that cold front coming through. Let's see exactly what the surface conditions are out there. So here is that front. Looks like it hasn't even arrived yet in Canada. Let me show you that here. So there is a frontal passage that's going to be coming through Alberta here. Temperatures begin to fall. Snow is starting to develop as those winds are bending back to a easterly direction with some light snow falling. Still though, pretty warm. Temperatures even near 50 up there across western Montana, but that's going to change as this front comes through. Even some moderate snow up there in the mountains of British Columbia. So that's it. Winter is definitely on the way here. We're going to monitor these winter weather alerts through the weekend. We're going to monitor the Western Caribbean. Once it becomes evident that a tropical cyclone is about to form, we'll definitely be going live as well. And it's possible that a Superstorm Sandy situation could happen toward the end of the month. It's possible it could be more of a traditional hurricane impact across southern Florida, and then the tropical system goes offshore. But it all depends on the evolution of that central U.S. trough and the phasing with this tropical system. The timing of both of those are very difficult to pinpoint this far in advance, and that's why there are many forecast scenarios possible with Epsilon lifting to the northeast and potentially impacting the Florida Peninsula, potentially impacting the northeast or the Canadian Maritimes as a hybrid type of a system toward the end of the month. But all of this we're going to watch through these live briefings Thank you guys for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy my weather reports.